Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Erin and I am a K-5 elementary music teacher in Northern Indiana, and I'm also the teacher author behind From Do Re Mi to You. So if you are looking for a fun, non-spooky Halloween chant to introduce quarter note and paired eighth notes, then Mrs. White Had a Fright is the perfect chant to add to your Halloween repertoire. I use this chant to present quarter note and paired eighth notes to my first graders who are ready for written notation. But this chant honestly would work really well for second graders as a review as well. So I'm going to give you the scoop on how to teach this lesson, but if you want the lesson pack with all the slides, I have full digital slides lessons and worksheets in my TPT store, along with supplemental teaching resources that you can add on to continue practicing rhythm. So before I get into the lesson, one thing that I need to clear up. Like most songs, there are different variations of this chant. I have seen it called both Mrs. White Had a Fright and Miss White Had a Fright. And while I like both, I chose to stick with Mrs. White Had a Fright because that means my first and my third line are the same rhythm and my students love a good pattern. So here's how I teach Mrs. White Had a Fright. So on day one, I start with the text of the chant, the lyrics. I ask my students to read it to themselves first, and then I'll ask a student to read it out loud. And then I'll ask another one. And after 2 or 3 students, they've discovered there's a natural pulse or rhythm to the chant. So once I see that they figured that out, I'll ask all of the students to chant it together. Then I change the slide to show ghosts with the steady beat and have them pad while chanting and then identify the steady beat. So even though my first graders haven't learned rhythm formally yet, they know that steady beat is the heartbeat of the music. I have this chant that goes like this: steady beat, the heartbeat of the music, the heartbeat of the music. Now, because I'm an ORF trained teacher who knows my kiddos can't sit for too long, we will also explore steady beat by tiptoeing. Now, we don't want to scare the ghosts, right? So to set my students up for success, I will also play the steady beat on the tubano, or sometimes I'll even tiptoe with them and just use a hand drum to really demonstrate how we tiptoe to the steady beat and not look like scampering mice. So once students have moved to the macro beat, then we try it with the micro beat. Now, I don't identify these terms with my first graders, but I do want to make sure that they experience them. Tiptoeing twice as fast can also cause some issues with students trying to look like scampering mice. So I do demonstrate it first. I have a student demonstrate it, and then I always do it on a drum, either sitting with my tubano or with my hand drum while I'm up moving with them. And that's all I do for day one, about 10 minutes worth. Then on day 2, on the next lesson, I have them review the chant and pat the steady beat, but I ask them to use their detective ears and listen for beats that have 2 syllables instead of 1. Now, I do want to say I use the term syllable and not sound because for my students, sound and syllable do not mean the same thing in the classroom. And I have found that if I use the term sound, the students are looking for every individual sound and not syllables. So I always use the term syllables with my students. So we go line by line and they discover that some of the beats have 2 syllables in them. And then we change the ghost from purple to 2 orange ghosts to show 2 sounds per beat. And then comes the fun part, identifying rhythms. Now, I know many teachers use the phrase of rhythm the way the words go, but I also tend to use the chant rhythm, the long and short sounds. And then later on, once we add a rest, I'll say, or no sounds at all. And they echo that back. Now, when it comes to introducing rhythm, there are different rhythm syllable systems that you can use. And this video is not about getting into which one is better or which one's worse, because honestly, they're all good. I like all of them. I started with ta and titi. I have switched to ta and tati, but I also have friends that use do and do day. So all are good and valid, and I have slides that include all of the different rhythm syllables. So you can just delete what you don't need. Once they have learned their new rhythms, then we transfer those new rhythms onto the ghosts, and students can chant the rhythm using the rhythm syllables with the music notation and with or without the iconic notation in the background. And that honestly takes about 10-15 minutes tops on day 2. And now they've learned ta and tati. Now, day 3 and day 4, this is where I start to get a little extra. I'm an ORF teacher. I like adding movement. I like adding instruments. I want to make this chant come to life. I don't like learning something just for the sake of learning it. So now that we have identified our new rhythms, ta and tati, or ta, ti, do, day, whatever you want to call it, let's make this chant come to life. There are a lot of ways you can do this, and it largely depends on your students, the instruments you have available, and the time that you have in class. So I first start with adding a bourdon or a drone with several students on my bass xylophones. I like to do E and B because if I choose to have them sing the chant on G and E, Mrs. White had a fright in the middle of the night. When you add E and B, then you've got this really cool minor spooky sound. So my first graders, their goal on the ORF xylophones is to be able to keep a steady chordal bourdon, and I'll have a handful of my students play the bourdon for that. Then I have students identify the sets of rhyming words. There's white, fright, and night, and then there is ghost, toast, and post. And I will say classroom teachers love it when you add in literacy and finding rhyming words, alliteration, anything like that. They love it when you do that. So once students have identified the sets of rhyming words, then I'll have students choose an instrument to represent each set of rhyming words. And then I'll put 3 or 4 students on each instrument. So maybe I've got 3 students on my bass xylophones. I'll take 3 or 4 students on wood blocks, and then maybe 3 or 4 students on triangles. And then we can layer those parts in. And then if I have time, I'll choose a few more students to play the whole rhythm on rhythm sticks. Now, in the chant, did you notice something really cool? All of the rhyming words are quarter notes, and everything else are eighth notes. So if this weren't my kids' first exposure to written notation, one thing you could do as a review, if this was a practice for you, is have the rhythm sticks play the tatis and the other instruments play the tas. Now, I'm not going to do that to my kids right off the bat, but that is something else that you can do. But then I'm not done. Now, I could rotate students on instruments so everyone had a chance to play xylophones or rhythm sticks or one of the other instruments, but you could also add a soundscape. And this is where the rest of your class can get involved. A soundscape is just exactly what it says. It's a sound, but there's no rhythm to it, and it creates some kind of experience. In this case, a spooky experience. So you can use instruments and other materials that you have in class. So this may be the perfect time for your kids to explore improvising on glockenspiels in a minor melody, adding a vibraslap or a fluxatone. Is there a student that makes a good ghost or witch sound? You can use white scarves, finger lights, and then even dim the classroom lights. And this is a great way for your students to take ownership of the chant. And then last but not least, you can turn it into a whole performance piece with an ABA form. Have the students do the chant with one set of instruments, have the soundscape in the middle, and then do the chant again. Then once students have performed this, they can share this performance with their classroom teacher, have the principal come in, or even record it and share it with the parents. Now, there are multiple ways you can also extend the lesson beyond learning the rhythms and turning it into a performance piece. If you use the digital slides lesson, there's also 4 worksheets that are included so you can assess their ability to write and notate ta and tati, and also just practice writing the rhythms, because that in itself can be challenging to first graders. If you purchase the bundle that has the supplemental activities, you'll also get 10 themed digital rhythm flashcards. You can use it for clapping or instruments, or play your favorite spooky music in the background while you practice. And then I have also included a 10-question self-checking digital witch rhythm game that you can play as a full class or assign on Google Classroom on a day where you have a sub. So All in all, Mrs. White is such a fun chant to teach, and I hope you use it this year. Your first and second graders will love it. And while I just gave you my entire teaching process, make it easy on yourself. I have the slides and visuals all ready and set to go. So you can get the digital slides lessons and worksheets, or just the supplemental activities, or the bundle of everything included. And I'll have a link for purchase down below. Happy musicking, everyone.